Well, I think it's afternoon when this is to be broadcast. It's actually being recorded. And I'm looking, as I hope you are also, at the what we call the Garden Gallery at the Scottish Gallery. And this is where part of James Morrison's little exhibition, Decades of Studio Practice, has been hung. There's going to be a major memorial show for Jim, a full retrospective, and a new edition of the book on him by his son John Morrison next year. But this, I think, is a wonderful taste of Jim's work, and in a variety of scales. And this back gallery, it suits relatively smaller works. Some of the longer formats that Jim did favour throughout his life, I think, look particularly good in this space. And I'm going to talk initially about I think, which is the earliest picture representing the 1950s in the exhibition. So Lisa's going to zoom in on this picture, which poignantly is actually of Cataline. It's Cataline landscape, 1959. And a lot of people know that Jim moved there and started his family in Cataline, and obviously overlapped with Joan Erdley, who became a close friend. And there are some real links between their painting. This is a very dramatic and striking picture. And most people think of James Morrison as, if not a careful painter, then a sort of a realist painter. And he was. And indeed, there's realism in this work. These sort of blasted trees on the left-hand side, I could come straight out of the witches scene from Macbeth, couldn't they? And what seemed to be escaping bits of paint coming from the trees are these crows flying across the kind of dark fields, and then this incredibly dramatic color, which it is inspired by the sunset that he would have been looking at. But it's also a color that I think we can associate, particularly with the black, with sort of European painting at the same sort of time, with Tachist painters and North American painters, people like Riopelle and Soulage. There's a touch of American abstract expressionism in this painting also. And I think it's a very powerful image, and one that's painted with great attack and freedom. And it's a piece of expressionism. I'm sure it reflected what Jim was feeling at the time, and we can perhaps sense some of that. It was a time of excitement and optimism, with family arriving and in a new exciting location, and both he and his wife relatively new in jobs and so on. So a time of regeneration. He hadn't finished with Glasgow. He was going backwards and forwards, as was Joan Erdley, of course, and painting in Glasgow also. But a terrific work, and one that's come from the studio. We're so pleased to be able to include it. And Lisa, if we could move on to my second choice, because we don't have time to look at everything, of course. And yeah, on the right-hand side, it's a very poor image of it, really. Perhaps it was badly chosen, because you don't, well, no, here we go. No, yes, no, that's the Arctic one. I was hoping to look at the Swiss picture, but perhaps well, we'll look at this one. This is a sketch, I think we can call it that. It's a sketch of an Arctic subject. And Jim went 3 times to the Arctic in the early 1990s. Where he effectively joined expeditions. He wasn't really going as a tourist. He was joining quite serious expeditions, one botanical and so on. And my goodness, he worked hard. And he worked hard on the logistics to actually get his boards and materials to these extremely remote places in Greenland and the high Canadian Arctic, and painted on the biggest scale that he has ever painted outdoors. This is actually a slightly smaller work, and it just reflects that utter stillness and chill, looking out across the bergs from one of the camps. The Arctic had a profound influence on Jim, and I think this is characteristic, perhaps, of his whole career, and perhaps characteristic of the experience of a landscape painter. Because when you move to somewhere different, you have a new challenge, very often a technical challenge, as here, sort of frozen terps and the like. But also the challenge of dealing with something utterly novel and interesting in that way. And the art in particular made him look at the landscape back in Scotland in a new way. The presence of that Arctic experience is in a lot of his studio work. Best exemplified probably by the work that was ultimately hung in the Talbot Rice Art Gallery, which was a sort of extraordinary kind of Arctic exhibition, something actually made on site in the Talbot Rice. But this little picture, as I say, it's a sketch on the spot. It's very atmospheric. It would have been an important recording for Jim of the sensory experience that he was having in this remarkable place. So, Lisa, I'm not sure if we can go back to Switzerland or whether we've given up on the Swiss Alps. Moving across the wall. Yeah. Well, here it is. Wonderful. Thank you. It's like it's painted from a balloon. You get this extraordinary sense, vertiginous sense of elevation. And he's actually on a mountain near Geneva called Pilatus, I think. And he's looking down on peaks. He's looking down on cliffs. You can see the ice clinging to the cliff in the foreground there, perhaps a bit of meadow above it, but no sense of the green, no sense of relief from the sort of terrifying primordial landscape. This was the experience that artists like Turner had when they went to the Alps, and the Alps was a tremendous draw for the Romantic landscape painter in the mid-19th century when it sort of opened up onwards. And Jim, I suppose, he's doffing his cap in a small way at that succession of great Romantic landscape painters. And I do think this is an enormously successful picture. It's pure atmosphere, it's pure drama. And as I say, he has achieved that sense of elevation as he looks. I'm not quite sure what's cloud and what's mountaintop. And this is a real experience when anyone's been in the high tops and down on cloud and seen peaks coming up through cloud. It is a sort of rather disorienting and almost spiritual experience, in my view. And I think it's a very successful little picture from Jim. Again, it been done on the spot, carrying his materials up the lifts to get to this remarkable vantage point. Lisa, I have no idea where we're going next, but you will remember. But if we could move onto my third choice, that would be terrific. There you see Matterport is moving us through past a Montreatment beach painting. Yeah, I'm on to this picture, which hangs on the chimney breast as you come downstairs. Most of you would recognize that. Well, again, it's a very poor choice from me, really, isn't it? Because you're not seeing them, and there is a lot of detail in this picture. But I wanted to choose it because it's a significant subject for Jim. It's a winter Angus work, and he spent a lot of his life as a professional painter, in his anti-bad weather kind of zip up, kind of all-weather painting suits, stomping around his backyard, so to speak, the farms around his home in Newsan, south of Montrose. And when snow came, it was always an opportunity, often a fleeting opportunity. The snow might be there one day and gone the next. And snow, of course, didn't come every year. But this is him sort of hunkered down, looking across snowy fields to a sort of a thin line, a fence with a thin line of hedge on it across another field. And then you're seeing sort of the hills beyond. A lot of it is suggested, but actually a lot of the white in this, it's not the board, as sometimes it is, in skies and so on. It's white paint. He has actually, there's quite a substantial impasto in this work. And into that white, he's kind of worked the detail of some of the kind of bare winter trees in the middle ground and lovely indications in the far distance. I mean, Jim's work, it's by no means hyperreal, but it can give us a hyperreal sense of place. He can take you to a place, and with remarkable economy, because after all, he is painting and trying to finish these works within a day outside, since before that day becomes the next and is so different. He might, of course, work in the studio if he has to, but that is his studio practice, as so beautifully described by John Morrison in his talk last week. But no, there's no slavishness about it. There's no kind of Ruskinian kind of painting every blade of grass. It's not a kind of pre-Raphaelite sort of approach to landscape, but his ability to draw and draw quickly, particularly in the middle grounds, where the detail often is beneath the towering sky and beyond a relatively inactive field in the foreground, those marks that describe the trees are beautifully done and very characteristic of Jim. I think part of what we love about his approach to landscape and the way he paints is his ability to draw in that detail. So thank you, Lisa. If we could move on, I think it might even be my final choice in this whistle stop tour. Matterport is tipping you forward. You're looking at the tips of your toes at the moment, and there's the stair back up to the main gallery, and then you cross all the beautiful objects in place. But we're going to look at a picture which we only managed to fit in barely into the space downstairs. It's called The Road to Achnahad. And this picture is truly monumental. It's sort of more like kind of 8 feet tall, and clearly was not painted in landscape, and does contain some of those changes, if you like, some of those insights into the drama of landscape, which derived from his Arctic experience. This is actually the West Coast, and you're seeing a road through that kind of tufted, grassy foreground down to a lochside, and then beyond that, with light from the sky catching some aspects of the sort of escarpment of the cliff on the far side, and then above it, obviously, an absolutely splendid, towering Morrison sky, which I suppose forms not quite more than a third of the entire depth of the painting. So my goodness, it's an extraordinary work, very, very powerful. It draws you in. Obviously, the motif, the road, is a well-established way that an artist will draw a viewer into the landscape, and he's used this in a very successful and dramatic way, with the road going down towards the loch side, towards the edge. And he's painted something that is primordial, and this is something that we've all experienced in the west coast of Scotland, where in a treeless landscape in Ascent, you sense just the extraordinary age of the rocks. It's one of the most ancient landscapes in the world that has been formed by glaciation much more recently, but goes back to some of the earliest rocks in the world exposed in the west coast. And that is all there. It's in the painting. It's embedded in it. This is obviously something that Jim wanted to reach out and capture, and I think has done so in a work of extraordinary scale and ambition. So you're adding, to a sense, the essential drama that is the subject to the scale with which Jim has tackled it. And I think it's very successful. And as I say, we didn't want this little show to be just smaller works downstairs, so we put in that monumental piece, and there it is. So I would urge anyone that hasn't already been to come and see the exhibition if they can. It's on for another couple of weeks or so, and Callum McClure's show upstairs, I think, makes a terrific September presentation. Lots more to come from Jim, lots more from me also in due course. But for now, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you've enjoyed this whistle-stop tour of our current Morrison exhibition. Thank you very much. Bye.